Welcome everybody to today's Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, Lake Norman Economic Development Stakeholder in EDC CEO Roundtable. We are excited to have everybody today. A couple of announcements. First off, next week the Chamber will be having a salute to small business, and we ask everybody to look at the Chamber's website at lakenormanchamber.org for all of the activities. Also, this coming Friday is our Focus Friday that begins at 8:30. It is a virtual program, and we have United States Senator Tom Tillis, who will be on the program this coming Friday, 8:30. It is emceed by our Public Policy Chair, Jeff Tart. And we have a whole host of questions that we want to ask Jeff, but we would, Tom, but we would allow other folks who are viewing to look at that. If you want to be a part of that discussion, you can reach out to us at the Chamber, 704-892-1922, or Russell at lakenormanchamber.org, and I will send you a Zoom credential. Ryan, before we actually have you introduce our speaker, why don't you share a little bit about maybe what's going on in terms of economic development in and around the lake?
Thanks, Bill. Exciting times in our area. We're seeing a construction boom. Which is very encouraging for us. It feels like I just got here about when I came on in 2013, we had 0 spec buildings in our market. And right now we just calculated we have over 4 million square feet of space coming up, and that's either in place, under construction, or going through permitting and planning. So great news for us. I think as we're seeing, hopefully things opening up more, and now Stephen and his team are able to get overseas, and then Chris and his folks are traveling more frequently. We're going to see more, excuse me, more, oh, gosh, allergy season. We're going to see more international projects. So I think we're really going to be well positioned for that. Lots of space, and as companies need to move quickly, we're going to have we're going to have good building options for them. So all positive news on our end, and we're excited for the upcoming summer. Gosh.
And would you like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today?
Yeah, absolutely. We're pleased to have Chris Chung join us. He runs the EDPNC, which is the recruiting arm for the state of North Carolina. He's obviously had a great year with some huge announcements already. But we're excited to find out how things are moving along at the state level. Obviously, we have a great relationship with our state team. Melanie, who's on the call, is our existing industry coordinator. So we leverage her and her resources pretty frequently when we have companies that are looking to expand. But Chris, I'll turn it over to you, and looking forward to hearing an update from the state level.
Great, thank you very much, Ryan. I definitely I share your sense of allergies. They're particularly bad this morning in Raleigh too. So if I have to hit the mute button so I can cough and clear my throat, I apologize in advance. Well, thank you for having me. Ryan, I'm not sure how long you want me to go for. I can of course adjust as necessary. I thought what I would do is just cover a little bit of what we saw in 2020 across the different functions that we perform, especially the business recruitment and business expansion functions, which I know most groups like this tend to want to hear a bit more about. Talk a little bit about what we're seeing in 2021 so far as we approach the midway point of the year, and then just wrap up with some of both the challenges that we see going forward, as well as maybe some of the opportunities for North Carolina as a state. Probably be about 20 some minutes if that works. I can also pare it back. You tell me.
That sounds great on my end.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, then we'll go ahead and get started. As you, sorry, there it goes, allergies. So we've got a number of functions at the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina. Like I said, I'll focus in a little bit more on what we do, both to recruit companies, working with partners like the Alliance and our local EDCs at the county and city level. We also, of course, through the work of colleagues like Melanie on our team, support the growth of existing firms, especially manufacturers across North Carolina. Some of the other functions that we perform that people may not realize, we are also the state's tourism marketing arm. So anything designed to bring leisure travelers, especially into North Carolina to spend their money on our hotels, our restaurants, our tourism attractions. That is something we do at the state level under our Visit North Carolina team. So we work very closely with partners like Sally Ashworth, who I know is on the line as well today, who do such a great job promoting their local destinations for tourism. We also do work to support exports overseas. So a lot of those mid-size and small manufacturing firms that Melanie will spend her time working to help support, when they express a desire to gain or develop more customer markets around the world outside the US, we have a team that's focused on helping our North Carolina companies connect to those markets around the world and hopefully rack up more customers, rack up more sales, and enable those companies to expand further in North Carolina. So that's a function that not everybody realizes EDPNC is responsible for at the state level. Last but not least, we're also responsible for small business startup counseling. This is essentially a hotline that we staff. It's for any, and some of you may have done this or doing this right now, but as you think about starting a new business, oftentimes entrepreneurs have a lot of questions around what steps may be involved in that process. Are there licenses, permits, any other special requirements that they need to be mindful of at a state or local level? And so our team is helping those individuals navigate that process so that they can get off to a quick start and a successful start with beginning that new business here in North Carolina. So those 5 functions of business recruitment, existing business support, tourism promotion, international trade assistance, and small business counseling, those make up the universe of activity that EDPNC was created to be responsible for almost 7 years ago. When these functions were spun out of state government, what was the North Carolina Department of Commerce at the time, these functions were spun off and set up into a new nonprofit. That's what the EDPNC represents today. So we have a contract with North Carolina to do these things on the state's behalf, on behalf of the Commerce Department. But we also, as a nonprofit, we can fundraise dollars to support us from the private sector. And so we're lucky to have close to 80 private investors donating everything from $1,000 a year up to $100,000 a year, supporting the work that we do across recruitment, tourism, trade, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit about the organization. Along with myself and Melanie, we've got about 60 other colleagues who make up the whole EDPNC team, most of us based at the main office here in Raleigh, but you've got members of the team like Melanie who are living and working in the regions that they serve. So not too many of us doing this work, but we try to be as efficient as possible in covering those 5 parts of our mission. So like I said, today, I'm going to focus on a little bit of what we saw in 2020. It's getting further and further in the rearview mirror, but it's still worth talking about what were some of the biggest impacts of the pandemic on our economic development work. Then I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen in these first 5.5 months of 2021. And then, like I said, I'll wrap up with some of the roadblocks as well as the potential opportunities that we see for North Carolina to up its economic development game. And I'm going to keep this at a pretty statewide level. I'm happy when we get to Q&A to drill down into specific questions around the Charlotte region, around Mecklenburg County, around Lake Norman. Happy to get into any and all of that as much as I'm able to. 2020, I would say when you look at the business recruitment and expansion portion of our mission, which again tends to get the most attention because that's just for whatever reason, I think when you have a company that's expanding or you have a company that's moving to the area, that's greeted with a lot of publicity, tends to get a lot of elected official engagement for those announcement events, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings. When we talk about that part of our mission, both the work that Melanie does for us in the Charlotte region, as well as her colleagues around the state and our business recruitment team, it was a far better year than any of us would have expected at the onset of the pandemic 14 months ago. I think like many economic development groups, and I'm sure Stephen Pierce from the Alliance could speak to this, maybe Gretchen could at the county level, those first couple months of the pandemic, we saw deal flow drop precipitously. Like many economic development groups, we measure our activity level with a sales pipeline, the number of active expansion and recruitment deals that we're working. We saw that pipeline contract very suddenly and very severely as companies basically put off or canceled any kind of growth plans that they had until at least they had some better sense of where the pandemic was headed, how severe and strong would the pandemic, or how widespread would the pandemic be. Remember, I mean, it wasn't all that long ago where we were all wondering when that light would be at the end of the tunnel. And in that kind of uncertain environment, no surprise that companies would forestall any plans that they had for either locating a new operation or expanding an existing operation. But I'm happy to say from about May forward through the end of the year, a lot of that activity picked back up. We saw new activity come through the door, and long story short, it ended up being a much better year in terms of those results, which I'll share in just a minute. Tourism, on the other hand, as folks like Sally can tell you, we know at a statewide level, tourism was by far the biggest industry that was hit by the pandemic, both in terms of revenue and spending, as well as employment. We saw tourism spending, for example, drop by close to 30% from 2019 to 2020. We had come off of 3 consecutive record years of tourism visitor spending in North Carolina in 17, 18, and 19, peaking in 2019 at about $27 billion of visitor spending that supported 250,000 tourism industry jobs, leisure, hospitality sector, et cetera, 250,000 jobs supported by that 27 billion, all across North Carolina's 100 counties. That visitor spending level dropped to just over $19 billion last year. Domestic visitor spending, needless to say, took a big hit. International visitor spending tumbled even more for obvious reasons. It's just for 9 months of the year, international visitors cannot even get into the country still right now without quite a bit of hassle and burden. And so, again, it's not surprising that we'd see tourism numbers drop off dramatically, especially for those foreign visitors. Either way, we saw this impact just as severely on the employment front, whether that's hotels, motels, restaurants, a lot of the service industries that cater to the tourism audience, as well as local spending. Many of those businesses, you all know this, unfortunately had to pare back, and many of them did not get through these past 14 months. International trade also hurt by the pandemic. When you've got a global pandemic that basically suspends a lot of the movement of people and products, that's going to cause a lot of pressures on our companies and their ability to export and sell more overseas, but also to develop new customer relationships. So much of what we do to support exporters in North Carolina is enable them to attend some of these big global trade shows and industry events where they can connect with potential customers. And with a lot of that travel basically off the table, with a lot of those events essentially canceled or converted to a virtual platform where it's just a little bit more difficult to forge those customer relationships, our export activity as a state also dropped off. We were still able to help a lot of our normal companies. It's just we had to adjust our expectations for what that help would end up resulting in. Existing industry, I hope that folks like Melanie, who, again, part of that existing business support team for our organization, as well as others who do existing business support, hopefully a lot of people realize how important it is during these past 14 months to take good care of the companies that are already here in North Carolina. We know that business recruitment tends to get the most limelight in economic development because, again, everybody loves that notion of who are we attracting to North Carolina, who's that big win that we're scoring to get here. But when you go through something as disruptive as a pandemic, I hope every economic development organization saw how important it was to focus on just taking good care of the companies that are already here and helping them navigate what was a pretty unprecedented situation for everyone. I'll talk, like I said, about business recruitment and expansion. The headlines from 2020, close to 150 wins that both involved the recruitment of new companies to locate here, as well as the support of existing firms who went ahead and expanded here. Collectively, those recruitment and expansion wins totaled more than 20,000 announced new jobs that the governor, the Secretary of Commerce, the legislature were able to announce all across the state in all different corners of North Carolina, which is, of course, what we want to see. We know that the Triangle and Charlotte regions tend to get a lot of attention, but we are a statewide organization. And so anytime we can see some of these wins happening in places that are not along the I-85 corridor, that is certainly something that we strive for and celebrate when it happens. $6.3 billion in new capital investment. That's property tax base at the end of the day for the local communities that win these expansions and recruitment projects. 6.3 billion was a record level as far as we know, going back to as long as folks have kept records in North Carolina on economic development success. And so, as I said, these results would have been the farthest thing from anything we would have predicted at the beginning of the pandemic. And yet that second half of the year, this tale of two halves where we saw activity come to a standstill for March, April, and a good chunk of May last year, really kicked back into gear starting in late May. It almost felt like it was around Memorial Day weekend. I don't know, that seemed to be when some of the states began relaxing a few of the initial lockdown and stay-at-home orders. That really seemed to kick things into high gear. I think 3 months into the pandemic, maybe companies began to get a little bit better sense of how this might play out over the long term, and it restored enough confidence for them to either go ahead and proceed with those expansions or go ahead and start their search for a new location. Either way, we saw activity pick back up tremendously in the second half of 2020, and it really hasn't let up since that time. And fortunately, we've continued to not just see new project activity, we've been able to win our fair share, resulting in the types of results that you see on your screen. Key sectors for us, which I think are determined a lot by some of the changes of behavior during the pandemic. Food and beverage, clearly one of the biggest sectors that we continue to see activity in, as so much spending by consumers shifted out from restaurants and events and things like that. They have, of course, consumed a lot more food and beverage products in their own homes. Now, some of that, of course, is beginning to change as we feel more able to go out there and sit down and enjoy the pleasures of a meal at a restaurant. But for a good part of the past 14 months, a lot of that behavior has shifted to home. And so that's spurred the need for a lot of food and beverage product manufacturers to expand capacity. And that's one area we've seen a lot of activity. Life sciences, whether that's COVID therapy and vaccine related, or whether it's just anything that emphasizes the improvement of the human health condition. Life sciences being a major staple of North Carolina's economy, we saw a lot of activity in that area as well. And then just certain types of manufacturing that I think spoke to some of the changes, again, of consumer behavior during the pandemic. We've seen that flow into increased activity levels on our end in the project pipeline. Some of the major wins for us in 2020, of course, you all are familiar with the Centene Corporation corporate campus announcement last year. That's, of course, a great win for Mecklenburg County, for the city of Charlotte, really for the Charlotte region as a whole, and of course for North Carolina. It's $1 billion investment, 3,000 plus jobs. This is a company I'm pretty familiar with. They were headquartered in St. Louis. This is where I was based before I moved to North Carolina a few years ago. But they clearly have some ambitious growth plans, and North Carolina being the home for those growth plans, that's fantastic for us. Pratt & Whitney is also another major win from last year. That was actually out near Asheville. That is a new jet engine components manufacturing facility. It is a greenfield investment. They are building a new $600 million manufacturing plant that's going to employ 800 high-skilled, high-wage positions. Hopefully their timing is good. Obviously, the aerospace and aviation industry really took a hit last year as very, very few people were traveling by air. At least in the United States, we're seeing a lot of that starting to come back in earnest now, at least on the leisure travel front. Business tourism, business travel, that remains to be seen. But hopefully Pratt & Whitney, by the time they open up that factory in early 2023, demand for aircraft and all the aircraft components is starting to bounce back, and they'll be well positioned to make that factory really a showcase facility for them across their whole corporate network. Rockingham County, I know it's not near Lake Norman, but I'll want to give them a shout out. They definitely came out, I think, the best in terms of recruitment success last year. This is a rural area. If you're familiar with where this is Eden, Reedsville, it's north of Greensboro. But they landed no less than 3 brand new recruitment project wins, which is really hard for even the biggest, most well-resourced counties to do. Little Rockingham County did that with Ontex, a Belgian manufacturer of hygiene products, and 2 pet food manufacturing companies. One is Nestle Purina, and one is Farmina Pet Foods out of Italy. I think collectively something like a billion and a half new investment, 1,500 new jobs in a very, very rural part of the state. I think it speaks to some of the product that you heard Ryan talk about, that's so necessary to get these companies to locate in a specific community. And they were just really well positioned to have good product, but also good leadership at a local level. 2021, how are we doing so far? 50, let me make sure I've got this, 52, I think I've got my screen blocked, 52 recruitment expansion wins announced year to date. That's resulted in close to 10,000 announced new jobs and 4.3 billion in capital investment. Now, granted, more than half of that's attributable to just 2 projects: Apple's new East Coast campus, which is more than $1 billion of investment, and then Fujifilm Diosynth, which is building a brand new pharmaceutical products manufacturing facility. That's going to be close to $2 billion of investment. So just those 2 projects account for why, at this point, not even halfway through the year, we've already eclipsed the $4 billion announced new investment marker. And we've still got, again, 6.5, 7 months to go yet in the year. We've basically seen pipeline activity return to the levels that we were at before the pandemic. Remember, in those first couple of months of the pandemic, we saw everything fall out, or not everything, but 25% of our project pipeline drop out within 6 weeks of the start of the pandemic. We have gradually built back up so that we're sitting at about 182 active projects right now. The interesting thing about the pipeline as it sits is the magnitude of some of the projects that we are actively working. We have at least half a dozen of what we would consider to be mega projects. These are individual companies whose plans involve multiple thousands of new jobs and multiple billions of new investment per project. We haven't really tracked that metric before, but just anecdotally, that seems like the highest number we've ever been working simultaneously of those types of very large transformative type impact projects, which accounts for the total size of the pipeline being what it is. Those 182 active projects represent the potential for 71,000 new jobs and 44 billion in new capital investment, which, when you break that out across the average project, these are all pretty sizable, and it's because that average is being skewed by some of these very, very large transformative type opportunities. You heard Ryan talk a little bit about foreign direct investment. I was really glad to see that one of Stephen's colleagues at the Alliance was able to get over to Europe and do some prospecting. That has been really hard for most of the past 14 months. I think it's also been hard for foreign companies to do a lot of the due diligence here in the United States if they're planning a new location. Actually, Wall Street Journal just had an article about this a couple days ago, foreign direct investment. So basically a foreign company going into another country and opening up a new facility. That type of greenfield foreign direct investment is projected to remain considerably lower than normal across all countries in the world. And certainly I don't think the US is going to be much of an exception to that. We see that in North Carolina as a proportion of our project pipeline, which is attributable to foreign investment. We're normally at about a third of our deals involving foreign-owned companies. Right now, I just checked our numbers, it's 21% of our projects. And it's stayed at that rate pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic. Again, if a company is going to be spending 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion on investment on a new location somewhere in the United States, and it's difficult or impossible for them to travel into the US to do a lot of that on the ground research, you can imagine those plans may need to get postponed or shelved until such time as those transactions can be carried out a little bit more effectively. And hopefully we're getting closer to that, at least here in the United States. Roadblocks. I think workforce, that's everything from the leisure and hospitality sector that Sally deals with on the tourism front, to the manufacturing environment that Melanie deals with on the existing industry front. We were facing a workforce challenge before the pandemic. I've reminded a few folks that the big conversation for us in January and February of 2020 was not COVID. It was super low unemployment rate, very tight labor market, employees market, job searchers market, difficult just to even get enough warm bodies to apply for a job, let alone the skills and qualifications that companies were looking for. That was the big conversation topic. 14 months after COVID hit us all, you would think that unemployment being a couple percent points higher would ease that situation. The reality is it hasn't made it much better. And if anything, it's actually probably even tougher in certain sectors to get workers. There's no one explanation for it. You hear theories that some of it is generous state and federal unemployment benefits. Some of it is schools not reopening or childcare options being more difficult to access during the pandemic. And then, of course, the very real concern that a lot of people probably still have, which is contracting the virus by returning to a situation where they are there with lots of other people. It's probably some part of all of these explanations, but either way, those factors have all had an effect on the supply of labor that's available to the companies that need to ramp up, especially as we shift into a stronger recovery. We were in the Outer Banks a couple weekends ago, and it seemed like every other business had a now hiring sign going on. So the jobs are out there. The people to fill those jobs, even in a fast growing state like North Carolina, it's not an easy thing for our existing employers. And for all those new employers coming in, it's going to be the very first question that they're asking, which is, well, how can you ensure that we will have the talent pool that we need to draw from to set up this operation in North Carolina? So that will continue to be, I think, the biggest challenge for us, at least in the near term. You heard Ryan talk about it, but product availability, that's especially true for some of our rural communities. Remember, when we're working with a lot of these companies, barring the very small handful of firms that decide as a result of the pandemic that they can operate in a truly virtual fashion without a physical location, vast majority of the companies that we're working with, whether they're manufacturing, food processing, technology, life sciences, headquarters, they need a physical location, a piece of land to build their building on, or an empty building to move into. It's one of those two options. And for a lot of our rural partners around the state, they don't have those vacant buildings that are especially necessary for manufacturing, food processing, distribution center type operations. A little bit easier in the urban metro markets because private investment capital, private developers tend to step up and fill that gap. When they sense an opportunity in rural areas, that's a lot more of a hard sell. And so unless the communities themselves take it upon themselves to develop that product on a speculative basis, too many communities are almost disqualified from the start because they don't have the kind of real estate that the company is looking for right now on a very urgent timetable to locate this new operation. And then, as I said, it's been really hard for us to do a lot of the proactive prospecting. We're lucky, right? North Carolina, it's got a great reputation. We see a lot of projects come to us. The phone does not lack for ringing, even in the midst of a global pandemic. But we also spend a lot of efforts proactively going after and trying to identify companies that we may think are in growth mode and that we want to talk to about North Carolina as a future growth location for them. And whether those are domestic companies or especially foreign companies, a lot of that prospecting has really been challenged by just travel restrictions, restrictions around where to meet, how to meet. All of these things have, I think, dented our ability to get out there the way that we normally would to drum up new deal flow and shake the trees for some of those opportunities that we want to compete for. And again, I know that's just as true for us at a state level as it probably is for regional groups like the Alliance. It's starting to get a little bit better, especially again, as travel restrictions ease, as folks get more vaccinated and comfortable putting themselves out there in the field. I think hopefully we'll make a little bit progress on this in 2021, but it's not been the easiest in the past year plus. And then of course, the big question mark, so much of what we do in economic development, whether it's the industries that are either growing or shrinking, whether it's sectors like tourism and how much people are traveling for leisure and where they're traveling, so much of that economic development is ultimately dictated by behavior at the corporate and individual level. And we don't yet know which of these behavior changes that we've had to adopt, both in the corporate world and at an individual personal level, we don't know how many of these changes of behavior will actually stick around for a lot longer than the end of the pandemic. Different people have different theories. I have my own theory. The reality is everything that we do is going to be affected by the answer to that question, but I don't think we really have enough in the rear view mirror to figure out which of these changes of behavior end up having lasting significance and therefore tend to represent a bigger or smaller share of where we spend our time in the economic development space in the months and the years ahead. Opportunities, I'll close with this and then happy to take questions. I think we've got a unique opportunity right now, and we're having talks with the legislature about this. Governor supports it, and so we're now focusing on the legislature. But we really feel like we've got a unique opportunity to market North Carolina for business in a more aggressive way than we ever have. Like I said, companies are definitely in a transition period where, based on the lessons of the past 14 months, they're taking a strong and close look at where they want their future growth to be. Do they want it to still be in places like New York and San Francisco, which were utterly slammed by the effects of the pandemic, in large part because you had such dense populations clustered together? Is that where some of these companies still feel like their future is? Or will it be in more spread out, spacious, lower cost markets like North Carolina has to offer? There's a great opportunity right now to market our story to those companies that are thinking about their future, just as there's also an opportunity to market to individuals who now may be untethered from a physical work address because their employer has allowed them to work anywhere, everywhere, anytime. And if we can also pivot our marketing to target those remote work individuals to convince them to move to North Carolina, that's also got economic development benefits to it, because those folks are coming in and they're buying homes and they're spending money on local businesses. These are also opportunities that we should go for. And so while we spend a lot every year targeting the tourism audience, we're also making the case to the legislature that we're at a unique enough time where it's worth investing some amount of money as well in marketing to the business audience, both the traditional decision makers who figure out where their companies will expand, but also now some of this remote workforce that we know is going to come about as a result of these past 14 months. Reshoring, you hear a lot about that. We've certainly learned so much about how fragile global supply chains are and how something like a pandemic can really throw those off. So investment by companies in shoring up their supply base, that's going to translate into some opportunities, I think, for North Carolina. We know a lot of workers have been unfortunately displaced by certain sectors that have been hit harder during the pandemic. And some of those sectors hopefully bounce back quickly. Others, if they don't bounce back quickly, or if they decide they're going to automate a lot more to remove some of the labor element, because guess what? Automation isn't vulnerable to a pandemic. Either way, if you're going to have some number of permanently displaced workers from a specific industry, how do we retrain those individuals and upskill or reskill them so that they can fill jobs in sectors that we know will continue to see strong demand for labor? That is a big question for our workforce policy people at a state and local level. Place building, small business creation, again, some of the opportunities that we see as some of these individual behaviors start to firm up around where people choose to live in the wake of this pandemic. Like I said, you may see people move from the Bay Area to a Charlotte, a New York to a Research Triangle. You may also see people living in a Charlotte today who opt for a more rural part of North Carolina, or someone in downtown Raleigh decides to live in Rocky Mount because they don't have to be in an office 5 days a week, and they can afford a lot more. And all of these different things, we don't yet know how much of this is going to take hold permanently, and so much of it is an individual by individual decision. But these types of things like place building to attract that type of talent and population, those will, I think, continue to be opportunities for a lot of communities in North Carolina. So Ryan, with that, I think I said 20 minutes. I probably came in closer to 30, but happy to answer questions from folks for however much time we have left together this morning. But hopefully that all gave you a good look at what we've seen for the past year and a half almost, as well as what we see coming around the corner in the months and years ahead.
Chris, I have a question. Almost 20 years ago, Melanie Underwood and the town of Mooresville were able to attract Lowe's to the area, and we saw significant investment even into Huntersville in terms of suppliers. The Apple investment, do you see us benefiting significantly from companies that might locate here because of the Apple announcement?
Yeah, I think so Apple, right? It's not a manufacturing operation. It's essentially a software and technology development hub for them. So it won't be like if you attract an auto company where you need the part suppliers in close proximity. But you will, I think, similar to probably how Lowe's, corporate headquarters there probably attracts certain vendors and companies that do business with Lowe's to have some sort of satellite operation in close proximity to Lowe's corporate. I think you'll probably see something like that play out with Apple. It's a little bit harder to trace that out, like I said, compared to a manufacturing scenario. I also think Apple will have that indirect magnet effect in the sense that a company like Apple choosing North Carolina, choosing the Triangle region for this major new presence, that sends a certain signal to the rest of the market. Not just technology companies, but really any company that aspires to lead their own industry the way Apple leads theirs. And I think when that signal effect goes out there, what it's saying is North Carolina has the talent, the business climate, and all the other good stuff that a company like Apple needs and depends on. Well, we need those same things, or we want those. Maybe we should take a look too. And so what I think that's going to lead to is companies both in the tech sector and otherwise that decide to turn their focus to North Carolina based on what they see Apple do. And of course, just on the heels of Apple, I don't know if any of you saw this, a new book that came out by the author of a book that came out 10 years ago about Amazon, just released almost like a sequel. The second book is called Amazon Unbound. The first one's called The Everything Store. But Amazon Unbound dedicates a whole chapter to the big HQ2 search that I'm sure all of you, I know Katie and Stephen at the Alliance remember this because they spent a lot of hours on that effort for the Charlotte region. But the whole chapter is focused on this HQ2 search that Amazon undertook a few years ago. And one of the big reveals for us is that apparently the site selection team within Amazon recommended Raleigh as one of the 3 finalist locations to put HQ2 along with Philadelphia and Chicago. When you read the chapter, you find out that Jeff Bezos and his executive team essentially vetoed that list of 3 finalists, put forward another list of finalists, and ultimately that's how it ended up split between DC and what they thought would be New York. For us, that's great validation because it's further evidence that Raleigh, North Carolina as a whole has the talent to support something like that. I mean, we didn't know that at the time. It took us reading about this in this book that just came out last week to hear about it, but it's more validation for North Carolina and the business climate to see something like that.
Bill, can I ask some questions?
Please.
Christopher, I got 3 questions for you. First of all, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm a small business broker, so I'm at the low end of what you and Ryan do. And I thought I heard you say that your trends seem to be matching mine. And I just wanted to clarify that to make sure I understand. And I apologize if it's a sloppy question, but our inquiries are down for small businesses by about 40%. But inquiries for larger businesses, now keep in mind, it's still much smaller than what you do. My top business has a gross sale of about $5 million. But the inquiry for larger business is up 15%. Did I understand you correctly that that's kind of the trend that you're seeing as well, or did I misunderstand that?
I'm not sure I spoke on that so much as, so it depends on what you mean by small versus large, right? It's all relative. We don't deal with retail site selection or a lot of commercial real estate requirements. Our focus is usually industrial and office. I think that is all of what we do when it comes to business recruitment and business expansion. So that's going to be operations like manufacturing or food processing, not food service, food processing. It'll be things like corporate headquarter type facilities or software technology development centers, life science facilities, be that biomanufacturing, et cetera. So that's where a lot of it is, and that will tend to be larger. And that activity has been very, very strong since June last year.
And so, Chris, that's what I was trying to get to. So you're seeing an uptick in above about 15% this year. Am I understanding that correctly in your larger deals?
I don't know if I'm trying to think if I said the number 15%.
You didn't. That was my number.
Okay. So what I would say, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So one measure that we use, and I didn't have it in here, but this might answer your question. Every month we measure the amount of new activity. So these are the RFPs, requests for information, requests for proposal that we essentially learn about and get a chance to bid on. It's a company or their consultant who approaches us or one of our local partners who pulls us to the table. Those new projects that come in through the door every year, they're not projects that we've won yet. We're just starting to compete for them. We look at how many new projects we're fielding each month. Since June of last year, every month compared to the same month 12 months ago, we have been seeing consistently anywhere from 10 to 60% more new projects come in through the door each month since June of last year than the same month a year prior. I think there's one exception to that. October, it was essentially the same, flat, maybe a little bit less than October of 2019. But that's the magnitude of increased interest we see in terms of project activity. Like I said, some months it's been 10 to 20% better than a year prior. November and December, it was like 50 or 60% greater than a year prior.
And I'm seeing that same trend on larger deals. I'm seeing the exact opposite on smaller stuff, what we would call Main Street business. That's still down about 40%.
And that's entirely possible. Like I said, that is a sector we don't typically get involved with, not because it's not important. It's just our toolbox is more equipped to serve those companies that, like I said, tend to be industrial and office. And if you had to generalize, they tend to have some latitude or flexibility over where they go, right? A lot of retail has to be within certain areas because they're trying to serve a certain population. That's not necessarily true of something like a corporate headquarters or a large global manufacturing facility that has customers all over the world. And so what we see, it may not be reflective of what that Main Street business experience may be in terms of what's going on there.
And you stepped right into my second question. What seems to be the one or two primary reasons people are choosing North Carolina? What is that for you?
So I think talent has been a big part of it. Every industry that we deal with depends on having a quality workforce. And as much as a workforce is going to still be a challenge, it's a challenge everywhere. I don't think there's anywhere in the country where this is an easy problem. We would make the argument that it is easier in North Carolina for a few different reasons. One is our very strong educational system, especially our post-secondary community college 2-year degree and universities and colleges, the 4-year degree. Not only world-class research universities, but also a lot of historically Black colleges and universities, which are producing a lot of talent that companies are looking for right now as well. All of this is producing one of those tributaries of talent into the talent pool. The second, of course, is special for North Carolina, but we've got exiting military to the tune of about 20,000 military service members every year, which are leaving one of those 4 major operations that we have in North Carolina, re-entering civilian life. A lot of these individuals possess at least many of those soft skills that employers that we deal with are looking for: punctuality, ability to pass a drug test, strong work ethic. That's another tributary feeding our talent pool. And then probably the best statistic we can put out there is our in-migration rate. People continue to move to North Carolina. That's been our story for the past 40 years, especially in markets like Charlotte and the Triangle region. And that in-migration of educated population of working age, that really, of course, fuels our population growth and therefore our workforce growth. And remember, if people are moving here with school-age children or young children, those folks eventually become part of our workforce if they stay here too. So these things kind of feed. So talent is a big part of it. And I would say cost. There are, of course, lots of great talent pools around the country. But when you look at the full scope of business cost in North Carolina, whether that's things like wages and salaries, whether that's construction and real estate, whether that's taxes, whether that's energy, all of these different inputs that make up costs for North Carolina companies, as competitive as anywhere else, if not more so. And I think those two things combined, definitely a big part of what we offer to companies looking for their next growth location.
Chris, Mayor Washington talked about, well, hold on, Joe. Mayor Washington's talked about the 3-legged stool here at the lake, and we have the EDC, we have the Chamber of Commerce for Business and Commerce, but we have travel and tourism, which you spoke to. An important partner of ours is Visit Lake Norman, and certainly the hospitality industry was hard hit during the pandemic, and it's very important to our region. Sally Ashworth's on the line. Sally, can you speak to what's going on right now with the hospitality industry at Lake Norman?
Absolutely, Bill. And Chris, thank you for sharing the information that you have with us on a global level. But as far as the Lake Norman area, Visit Lake Norman is aggressively marketing the events that we bring in all the time. And as you spoke and alluded to earlier, that we've had many challenges with our hotels and we continue to have them. And what we have started doing with having these one-on-one conversations with our hotel owners is we are all absolutely right. We cannot get these workers back into these hotels on the frontline operations with the guest service representatives and the housekeeping. So what we've done is we have started making a path in the high school areas as far as these schools are concerned and teaching them, as well as, I know yesterday we just brought on 4 new interns, and we're just so excited about the announcement and the work that they are going to be doing for us through August the 15th. But what's more important is to teach them, even though that they may be a marketing intern, teaching them the importance of hospitality, as well as looking back into these high schools before they enter the colleges, to where we get them back on track as far as if they would be interested in doing something like this. When you are in the hotel industry and you're operating a hotel, it's so hard to bring in people just for like 2 or 3 months, because it takes a lot of time to teach them and to train them. So we are really being aggressive in going back and looking at those skills in the workplace as far as in our schools, and then starting from there and bringing them on board.
Hey, Bill, I've got a question if we have time.
Yes, sir.
Chris, I'm curious about one thing that I know Melanie and I used to work on pretty hard up in the Mooresville market. And that was when she was helping us do some transition of our EDC up there, did a great job at it. We were in the process of setting up some targeted industry settings whereby we didn't go after everything. We were a little bit more focused than that, and that worked pretty well in Mooresville. A lot of success up there that she had, and we continue to have. But my question is, as you think about Charlotte and the Lake Norman region, what are your focus industry types that you go after for this particular setting here? I see Apple Land in Raleigh. That's great for the state. But I wish it landed in Charlotte or maybe at Lake Norman even. So how would you evaluate your targets here?
Yeah, and remember, we're going to speak to it from a state perspective. I think at a state level, we don't want to be presumptive to pick sectors that we think different areas of the state should go after, right? So the question of what the Charlotte region as a whole is targeting, it may be better answered. It is better answered by folks like Stephen and Katie with the Alliance. I see Gretchen from Mecklenburg County is on too, so you may want to speak to it from an even more local perspective. At a state level, we've got certain sectors that we will continue to target. And a lot of that, of course, is directed by folks like the governor and the Commerce Department, for whom we do this work under contract. We want to make sure that we're aligned with what sectors they put a priority on. And those include life sciences, information technology, advanced manufacturing, specifically automotive, and aerospace related, and then clean energy, which is something that we've been focused on, whether that's energy storage or things like offshore wind and some of the manufacturing supply chain that go after that. A couple other niche sectors that we also go after at a state level are food processing and food manufacturing, as well as defense related support industries. So collectively, those are some of the sectors we're going to be spending pretty much all of our time on when it comes to business recruitment. Now, tourism, of course, is also a focus by definition, but when you're talking business recruitment, it's going to be in one of those 6 or 7 sectors that I just mentioned.
So how do you coordinate, the priorities here with the statewide priorities? Are you involved with that? Are you talking to these local recruitment entities?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very good relationship with a lot of our local and regional partners. I think it's, in terms of coordination, remember, if we're out there speaking about North Carolina, our role really is to get companies interested in North Carolina. Wherever they land within these 57,000 square miles called North Carolina, really, it's a win if we get them here in the state. And we're going to continue to focus on those sectors that we think serve the state's interest the best from an investment and job creation potential. That may be slightly different than where a Mecklenburg County or a Charlotte region or a Lake Norman region wants to focus its specific efforts, but that's okay, right? I mean, I don't think it has to be match up one for one. I think oftentimes what you'll see is that, at least for our local partners, Mecklenburg, Charlotte might be a little bit of an exception to this, but for many of our local partners around the state, they see a lot of their deal flow coming in through the state, right? Because the state ends up being that first point of contact for a lot of these companies. Rather than contact 100 different counties, frankly, right, it's just easier for a consultant or company to engage a group like the EDPNC and say, this is what I'm looking for. What do you have in North Carolina that makes sense? And our job, working closely with our local partners, is to make sure we're as fluent as possible to speak to different areas of the state in terms of what that company is looking for, so that hopefully that company ends up choosing somewhere in North Carolina. But we also recognize that certain industries, like, pick some industry that you consider objectionable or that you wouldn't want in your town. We're not going to force that on a community, right? It may fit a state priority for us, but it may not be something that local community wants to have or certainly wants to incentivize. And we always have to be mindful of that at a state level. Hopefully there's somewhere else in North Carolina that wants it, but the last thing we ever want to do is bring a company to a community that's not going to welcome that company with open arms, because that ends up ending badly for everybody involved. you don't want that sort of a poor fit. And that's something that you have to juggle when you're working across 100 counties and I think several hundred municipalities.
Mayor Washam, I know we also have Mayor Knox and Mayor Pro Tem Bales on the line. Rusty, Melinda, do either one of you have a question of Chris?
Now, Chris, I just want to say thank you so much. It's a lot of information to disseminate, and I've been taking notes the whole time. So sorry for my lack of participation in being on screen, but I've just been writing stuff down as you've gone, and it's just so refreshing to see the level of work that goes on outside the realm of what we're used to seeing, and I can't say how much I appreciate the work that you guys do for us here.
Well, thank you. It's a team effort, not just folks like Melanie and myself, but all the different organizations that are our partners that are on this call today. But thank you for the kind words.
I know we have the chair of the EDC and right with him is Melinda. Do either one of you two have a question of Chris?
I don't have a question of Chris. I echo Mayor Knox's sentiments. It's, serving on the Lake Norman EDC board has been an eye-opening experience for me over the last 10 years. But it's also nice to connect with individuals from the state perspective and understanding the industries that we're looking to attract, and also hearing that we're all on the same page in regards to workforce development and making sure that we're all working together. It is a team effort to make sure that we have that educated workforce. So it's greatly appreciated, and it's refreshing to hear that the things that we value at the local level, that North Carolina values as well.
Brett?
Melinda.
Yeah, I mean, I only have one question. It's probably the same one I always ask is, the deal flow for data centers. How are we doing with data centers at the state level and bringing that type of focus and landing those deals here?
So I don't think of those 182 projects we're actively working right now. I don't think we've got more than maybe a couple that are data centers. I certainly think I've been here for 6.5 years now, and I know that we had a bit of a heyday with data center business recruitment success going back about 10 years. I think that's when Yahoo, Google, Apple, Microsoft, AT&T all put very large enterprise data centers in North Carolina at that time. Obviously last week, High Point just announced DC Blocks. That's a big data center company out of Atlanta. They're putting a new data center up in High Point, which is great. But for whatever reason, we don't see a tremendous amount of that type of site selection activity. Why that is, I'm not sure. There's a lot of factors involved in that, just like there are lots of other industries. The Alliance folks may have a different perspective at a regional level in terms of whether or not they're seeing that, but at a statewide level, we're certainly not seeing what I understand we saw a decade ago in terms of the amount of those types of projects out there, let alone how many we're looking in North Carolina.
Ryan,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And I would just add, obviously one of the growth engines that we see going forward is this electric vehicle trend. How are we doing in that space? Where do you see North Carolina falling out? Are we going to be a tech hub for maybe battery development, or is there going to be some additional manufacturers of vehicles?
Yeah, that's a different answer to the question that Pat just asked, and yeah, we are seeing a lot of activity on that front, and it is all of the above of what you just referenced. So these are both legacy companies in those spaces, as well as startup companies that are very well funded. Some of whom have made their plans very publicly known about where they need to have additional growth. So I think we're definitely, I think, in the opening rounds of these next few years where you're going to see a lot of this pivot in the broader automotive sector. And that pivot's going to translate into tremendous opportunity for economic development groups to capture either the battery manufacturing, the vehicle assembly, some other part of that supply chain. I really feel like these next few years are going to give us our best shot probably our best shot in the past 20 years of landing that elusive automotive industry win that I know so many people across North Carolina would like to see the state get. And if we miss our chance in these next 2 to 3 years, I mean, one, shame on us, but we're not going to see another window of opportunity like the one that we're in the opening stages of because of the dramatic changes to the automotive sector. So fingers crossed that among these different opportunities that we're working on right now, as well as the ones that we know are coming, we're going to win at least one, but maybe more than one if we play all our cards right.
Ryan, I know we're coming up against the top of the hour. We said we'd hold this to an hour. I think it's important for our next program in a couple of months, maybe in July, to either focus on workforce development, transportation, or a legislative update, one of those three. Maybe we'll poll our CEOs and find out what's the most significant to them. But I'll throw it back to you for any final comments in regards to today. Ryan McDaniels.
Bill, if you don't mind, I have one final question for Chris, and that centers around broadband. As we talk about the migration coming into North Carolina and not knowing what remote work looks like, how important is it for North Carolina to really get a handle on broadband across the state in order to make these things happen?
Super important. I think both for the state policymakers as well as a federal level. I think that's why you have seen such a drumbeat for widespread broadband investment, even predating the pandemic. I think the pandemic's only putting a greater light on that. I think Melanie's daughter, I think, is on the line. She's actually works in economic development in the Eastern North Carolina. She actually wrote a really good op-ed about this, talking about her rural community that she lives and works in. But look, again, remote work, it's not just about people moving from San Francisco to Charlotte or New York City to Raleigh. This is just as much about potentially people moving from Charlotte to pick some rural area of Western North Carolina or the Sand Hills, because they don't have to be in that office 5 days a week. They actually have some flexibility. And so maybe it's worth it to live a little further away if they can afford more house, more land, be out in the middle of nature. I mean, again, different strokes for different folks. And that's going to be a lot harder to realize if you don't have connectivity to whatever that workplace is. That you're still tethered to virtually. And so, yes, to answer your question, I can't emphasize that enough as part of one of those building blocks for economic development in the state.
Well, I would imagine that it also impacts education and making sure that the skills that are necessary for the jobs that we're looking to bring in, where they have access to that education piece.
Absolutely. I mean, whether it's distance education, telemedicine, virtual commuting. Yeah, I mean, all of these things, of course. I mean, hard to imagine life without dependable high-speed internet. And we take it for granted, right? Living in places like most of us on this call do, but you don't have to go very far out of these pockets of prosperity to realize that that's not the case everywhere. And that's shortchanging our fellow residents on educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and even health care opportunities. And that's really not a recipe for widespread prosperity in the state.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Ryan?
I just want to say thanks, Chris. We appreciate your time. We were just talking internally here. It's interesting to see your project mix. We're probably skewed 75% FDI type projects. So we're excited to see your team back on the road, and same with the Alliance. So thanks for your time, and we appreciate your guidance today, giving us that statewide perspective, because it's really helpful. And send us some projects. We always appreciate that.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for everyone's time and great questions today.
Thank you, Chris. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.